Hi, it's Gerard Virga, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 18 of the Florida Family Law Attorney Podcast. And I have somebody on here who I've been wanting to get on for a while. It's Jacob Nolin with Nolin and Nolin Investigations. Jacob's a private investigator in our area, and he's one that really goes the extra mile in all of his investigations and his techniques. And we were just really excited to have him on. Jacob, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, sir. Private investigator, came out of law enforcement. I started my career in the corporate field as a corporate investigator. While I was there, they sent me to school to get certified in internal investigations and in interviewing and interrogations of employees. I was there while I was employed for the corporations, put myself through school to go in law enforcement standards. My dad was in law enforcement. My granddad was in law enforcement. So I kind of followed those footsteps. After I retired, I think it's happens to every cop. Between me and my dad, we kept getting phone calls of people asking for help, asking for advice. And that kind of led us to opening a private investigation business. We've been open since 2018, and we work multiple states all across the Panhandle. I have 11 investigators under us now.
Amazing. It's a neat story about how it's been in your family, investigations and law enforcement, and it's in your blood, and now you've taken it to a whole nother level and kind of done almost a statewide private investigative service. What areas do you guys service? Is it just Florida, or do you go outside of Florida?
We have 7 states that we cover, but Florida is our main state. Most of my guys work throughout North Florida. I have my main offices in Panama City. I have satellite offices in Pensacola, Amelia Island, and we have guys that work basically out of their home. We got a couple guys down south. And then I have a multi-state investigator that covers cases that may start either in Florida or from another state like North Carolina and end up where we need investigations on both sides of it.
Well, I'll tell you this, I've worked with you on several cases, and I've always been just a big fan of your professionalism and how your approach. Knew you were coming on, and we got you to agree to come on. You told me that you wanted to talk about child custody investigations, which is one of my passions. Child custody cases are probably where I feel like I'm doing the most good, and it's something I feel passionate about. And so, I want you to, if you would, tell us about, your background in child custody investigations and why that's something you're passionate about.
So as far as training, I got a lot of training in law enforcement on child custody, child abuse, child neglect, domestic violence. I've continued while I was in law enforcement. I obtained 2 different degrees. I was selected as an FDA inspector/investigator. I'm the only one out of this circuit. I was approved by my agency and by the state attorney's office. And just over the years have had a lot of training in it. When we got into the private investigation business, it's probably one of, if not the most common call we get at this point is help with child custody investigations. So that's kind of how we got so far into it. And now we have just tried to raise our standards every year. We try to do the best job we can. We don't just do surveillance. We actually work in investigation. We're looking for evidence. We're looking on how we can assist in that case.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about how a child custody investigation might differ from other types of just PI work that you do?
Yep. So with a child custody investigation, it's more like a real investigation. We work investigations anywhere from a cheating spouse up to a cold case homicide. I have guys that have experience in everything. With a child custody investigation, we know that we're most likely going to have to testify to our findings. Therefore, we want to document, we want to do everything correctly. We want to represent ourselves very well in court. We want the evidence to get into court. So there's no shortcut about it. There's, putting in the work to get it. Every single case seems to be different. So it's a challenge in that way. It's not something I could just hire anybody to do. We continue training for this purpose.
And one of the things that, strike me about you when I was talking and we were kind of, talking a little shop, you talk about how you bring the whole team together and kind of come up with a plan and a whole kind of comprehensive, what are we really trying to investigate, what we're trying to prove, how we're going to get it in, what's going to have the most impact. You were the first private investigator I ever spoke to that really kind of took that approach. That's something that stuck with me about you because it showed the level of commitment you have to these cases. And not only, getting the evidence, but getting it correctly and also really just making sure that, it's a comprehensive view and it's not short-sighted, and that you're getting all the context and everything that goes into these cases, so that it's a good comprehensive investigation with and comprehensive findings. And I just thought that was the neatest thing.
Right.
So, as a family law attorney, when do you think that if other family law attorneys should bring you in to an investigation? That's something I kind of struggle with. Like, do we do it later? Do we do it in the beginning? What do you think is the best time for you to kind of be introduced to the case
We
and
like
to
we like getting in early as we can. If the case supports us being involved. Obviously, you're going to have clients that come to you. I have phone calls every day. And just because they want something doesn't mean it's there. I fill out our clients. I want to know that there's some reason they actually need us. I have to weigh out that it's not that a divorce has happened, one parent has moved on and is dating somebody, and it's hard feelings. We come in when there's actually evidence that is needed to show the judge that something different would be in the best interest of the child. you know so that's the kind of stuff we're looking for. I think if you have a client come to you and tell you, I have an ex, he has a substance abuse problem, he there's never a night that he doesn't go to bed, he's intoxicated, uh he child's always late to school, something of that nature, I think that's where we would be most efficient to help out a case.
well, I tell people a lot of times, and my view of it is sometimes people come to see us and they're in a rush to how fast can you file? How fast can I get something in court? How long is the case going to take? And my view of working with private investigators and in cases is, maybe rushing isn't the best approach. If I tend to believe that once people are served with papers, people know there's a case going on, there's allegations made, they're going to start living their life. They're living their life under the microscope.
It makes our
And
job
some
more
of the
difficult.
Yeah, to me, laying the groundwork first, getting the evidence, and then bringing the suit, and then having the attorney and the private investigator work in concert in the beginning to figure out what evidence is out there. How can we tell this client's story to the court with actual evidence from the beginning is so much easier than trying to basically reverse engineer or find evidence to support something where you've already stuck your neck out and said it's happening, and you may or may not have the cards to back it up. And that's to me,
And if they're aware a child custody case is coming forward with a modification, we still work them if we think we can get the evidence, but we have to worry about have they changed their behavior pattern just until this case is over.
Mhm.
The worst thing for us is to work a case knowing that something is occurring and not being able to get the evidence because it drives us crazy. But we know there's something actually going on. We want to get the evidence. We want to be successful. We want to have an impact on helping that child with being where that child should be at.
I agree. And the same with us when people come in and ask us to file a modification. My number one question is, how are we going to prove it?
Right.
You can prove some things when you live with somebody. It's a lot easier. You're home, you're there in the house, or you can take pictures. But when you're doing a modification and people are already living apart, it becomes a lot harder to know what's going on in that person's life or what's going on at their house. I think that's a critical distinction that a lot of people miss. When they're coming to talk to us, that it's become so critical to get the evidence early and to have the evidence before anybody knows what's going on. And then, is there enough evidence to truly support the case before you spend the money on the lawyer and prosecuting the case forward?
Right.
How do you work from the standpoint of determining the child's best interest? Like, what's your criteria, and how do you maintain objectivity? And as a lawyer, we always talk about what I think's best is not what mom thinks is best, and you have two parents in the household, and they may not agree on what's best. So how do you focus in on that and really reach clarity and maintain objectivity on what's best?
So I kind of look at us as more as a tool. We're fact finding. We're trying to obtain the evidence that the client wants. Sometimes, and I think me and you both know firsthand what the attorney believes will help the case versus what the client's asking us for. I'm probably telling them the same thing you tell them sometimes of what they're asking for is not going to help in the case. They're asking for stuff that I don't think is going to have a bearing on the case. So we do look at, I mean, almost all my investigators have been in law enforcement. We know when something's not right. We know when a child's not being properly taken care of, but we're going to call it fair as far as like dealing with clients, we charge our fees up front, and we charge our fees up front for a reason. And the reason is they're not paying us for them to tell us what they want us to say. Well, they're basically paying us for the results. That being unbiased, the results are the results. If they have came to us and told us a parent's doing something and we see no evidence in that, we're not gonna say that that parent's doing that. I mean, we still have a moral compass we work off of to do what's best for the child.
Jacob, tell us, kind of walk us through one of your typical custody investigations, your processes. I don't want you to give up any of your work product or your skill craft as an investigator, but just kind of walk us through the process generally.
So, as far as a child, to start up a child custody investigation, usually the first thing is I'm contacted. I'm the contact person for our agency. I will discuss over the telephone of why they believe they need us, the purpose they're contacting us, that being uh, the parent that has the child 50% of the time is never at home or always out drinking or whatever the allegations they are trying to tell us. If I believe that there is some merit to what they're saying, I'll next have them basically put us together an email breaking down who the other parent is, who the children are, what the custody is in place, what they believe the other parent's doing that is harmful or hurtful toward the child. Once we get that email in, we usually have a 24 to 48-hour process where me and my investigators sit down. We discuss each case as it comes in. They may think of something I hadn't thought about on a phone call that I'm discussing with the client. They may go, hey, the client, the potential client said this. Have we thought about this as an avenue to collect that evidence? So once we discuss that as a team, we're going to put in writing. Basically, we do a pre-operation, we put in a game plan, and we present it to the client. And we say, based on what you told us, this is what we're going to try to accomplish. At that time, they give me input on that's exactly what I want. Let's move forward, or that's not exactly what I want. I want to readdress this, or hey, I'm going a different route. If we do move forward at that point, we basically initiate our investigation on what our assignment is. We call it the assignment. And so we try to execute that assignment. We try to give them a time frame the best we can. Some cases may last a couple of days. Some cases, me and you both know can last years. But we don't involve the client within our investigation once we start. We're not an agency that's going to update them every time we get details on the case. We want to make sure our case is intact. We want to make sure that our investigators aren't in harm's way. And we don't want, that information to get out because that can definitely change the direction of an investigation. So that's one thing I try to make clear to our clients is you're not getting updates from us during this case. We don't want you on the phone with the opposing party in an argument saying, well, I'm having you watched. That's not good for the case, not good for us.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I know that one. I have that. We have that happen quite a bit
Yeah,
where the other attorney calls me up and says, "Well, you're about to file da 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 da, or you're going to do this," and I'm like,
right.
"Well, we
And
just
that's
talked
why we
about
kind
that
of
last
stay
night."
at
Yeah,
that. So once we finish up our part of the case, so we're big on details. We document everything, collect our evidence. We do a written case summary report. We try to prepare it for court use. So if we are called, we can testify to all our findings. We try to lay it out very clear. It's just we handle it as a full investigation from start to finish. The thing is, can we get the evidence they're telling us is there or not? Until we actually really start diving into it, you know, people want stuff to happen. It may not always be the facts of the case.
yeah. When you deal with child custody and you're dealing with these cases, I think it's a Carl Sagan quote that I always think of: that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Right.
And the number of times I've had claims made and there's no evidence ever that will substantiate the claim,
Right.
or it unfortunately just comes out to be a false claim. Having the evidence up front to me as a lawyer, is just it's really critical. And I like the way you were saying that you kind of seal off the investigation. You got to get your marching orders. Everybody kind of agrees on the process that you're going to use, and then you insulate the process so the client can't accidentally divulge it, doesn't maybe have access to the information, and ends up altering the behavior of the person you're watching or the circumstances you're trying to observe, which to me is a very well thought out process to preserve the integrity of the investigation. And honestly probably increase the chances of successfully finding what you're looking for or the absence if it's not there.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you've told me many times the evidence is just not there.
Right. And we've worked some cases together and we've been very successful in those cases, but we even limit, and I think one of the first cases we worked, I think I think you learned this on our process, is that we don't even release information to the attorney very often until we're almost done with our case. And we have had, believe it or not, other attorneys tell the opposing attorney, my client hired a private investigator. That does no good for us. Because if that was my client and the opposing attorney told me that, I'd be on the phone with my client telling them, hey, you're being watched, change your behavior. So, I mean, it makes sure that we get a fair shot at doing our job. If they hire us and retain us to do a job, we want to do it the best we can do. If we want to give it the best shot we got.
Well, since 2023, Florida's been a big 50-50 state where the
Yeah.
presumption now is equal time sharing 50-50. I know as a practitioner, it's put a lot of pressure on me to try to find evidence or better evidence because now I have to overcome a presumption. For those
Right.
people who don't know, there used to be no presumption for any time sharing schedule. Now the presumption's equal time sharing. So tell us, with that new presumption, what type of evidence are you looking for? How are you, really how's that affecting your process and your actual job and what you may be focusing your attention on more?
Yeah. So for us, Florida being a 50-50 state basically now to start custody has only increased the demand for private investigators or for child custody investigations because judges want to see evidence. I mean, we see it all the time, but going in and making an allegation without evidence, judge is not most likely going to change anything. It's going to be a waste of their money, time, everything like that. So when we get involved, we're looking for evidence of substance abuse, an unstable home, unhealthy patterns of behavior, lifestyle at the home, inappropriate individuals being allowed around the children, maybe activities that children are being introduced to that they should not be introduced to, or have access to. So we're trying to actually get those facts so we can document that, obtain evidence on that. So when an attorney like yourself calls us, we can testify to those findings to actually show the judge, "Hey, this isn't a made up allegation. This is the mom said the father has substance abuse. We pulled the trash. We collected evidence out of the trash. Each week we got over 100 beer cans that he had the child. That's a lot of consumption of alcohol when you're supposed to be caring for a child at school, needs to be fed, bathed, stuff of that nature. And we've had really good impacts with judges. I believe it makes the judge's job easier when there's evidence to base the decision off of than just two parties going in there and they both have different stories.
Since we had the presumption come into place, one of the things I really noticed is we used to go to court and we'd spend a lot of time on like who cooked breakfast, who drove the child to school, who picked
Right.
them up. And now all those issues that you really were talking about are more central now. Can I prove substance abuse? Can I prove domestic violence? Can I prove that there's anger issues? Who's in this house? Who's the kid being exposed to? Kind of getting into like almost moral fitness or exposure issues of what the child's being exposed to. Like, I think it's really shifted what the cases used to be about,
Right.
which was more of a stability and who historically did it, basically almost having to prove wrongdoing and almost immoral or unstable behaviors. It's really become the focus, which I have no doubt what you said is probably true that it probably increased the demand because I know now when I have a child custody case, my first question in my mind is how am I going to overcome that presumption? And I have to go to those factors and really start thinking about is there evidence? And if there is evidence, how do we prove it? How do
Right.
we go about collecting it? Which means I'll probably be on the phone with you.
Right.
Kind
Yeah,
of
I
pick your
think we have
brain about
definitely
it.
seen an increase. I mean, I would say a lot of my investigators have specialties. I mean, and we now make it routine to constantly do child custody investigation training. I need almost every one of my investigators to be able to handle that type of case and do it very well and efficiently. But it's just because the demand is up for us, on that being a more, a common case that's getting called in very often now.
Too, with we say child custody, it's technically a parenting plan with a time
Right.
sharing schedule. But, another, big, another major source of contention in these cases or modifications of existing orders, in my opinion, comes over decision making. And, sometimes an investigator, I think can be good in that regard because if the person is impaired, if they're going to, sporting events, curricular activities, and making those co-parenting situations, intolerable or harmful to the child, I think that plays a lot in the decision making aspect on is it going to be shared? Is it going to be sold? Is it going to be shared with an ultimate? And that's sometimes evidence that people don't think about is it may not move the needle on time,
Right.
but it might really move the needle when it comes to how the court handles those decision making responsibilities that every parent has.
Are you seeing personally, are you seeing any cases where anything other than 50-50 without evidence is being given to a parent?
I think it's very hard to overcome the 50-50 and without really concrete evidence. In my opinion, the judges are going to give you your day in court.
Right.
They're going to let you call your witnesses and you can call the lady from the pickup drop off line that you were always the parent picking up and dropping off. And they're not going to cut you short. Do think, though, from my personal observations, unless they're going to hear substance abuse, domestic violence, hanging out with maybe a criminal element, exposing the children to an unstable, unsavory living environment. You're gonna have to have some harder facts. It's not like I said, it used to be, I would say 70-80% of the case was who historically knew the child, who historically cooked breakfast, who picked them up, who did homework with them, how those responsibilities were divided. Now, though, with the presumption, you gotta have a lot more than that. You gotta come in really with your evidence laid out and to be taken serious. That's my view of it.
I really feel in the last year, all the cases that we have been involved in and went to testify in with evidence, we've seemed to have really good, I want to say, a feeling from the judge is taking in what we're what we're offering, what we're providing. It really seems to me that we're giving the judge a reason, if needed, for something to be changed in the parenting plan other than 50-50. But
Well, what I think is this as a lawyer, I think of myself sometimes as like a contract. A contractor can't build you a nice house unless you're willing to pay for the 2x4s, the
right,
tile, the cement, the nails, the screws. I think of myself the more I practice is more like an architect or a composer. I'm going to draw out the plan, or I'm going to kind of run the orchestra of the band here. It may be that we need a private investigator early on. It might be that we need somebody who does like forensic accounting or those things if it's got financial issues. And then, having them report back to me so I can build the best case.
right,
And inevitably what happens is you have clients who don't want to expend the money or maybe in a situation where they can't expend the money and you end up going to court with little to no hard evidence and basically they come in there with their photo album of pictures and pictures of the kids room and pictures of the kids at the water park with them or their Disney trip or whatever. But you know it's pretty easy for the other side to go toe to toe with that, and then, like you said, mere allegations without facts aren't evidence.
right,
And in some circumstances, if you make a big allegation, like a domestic violence allegation or some kind of an abuse allegation, and you don't have any evidence and the court thinks it's false, a false allegation can actually count against you.
right,
So, to me, you have to go in there early and the client's got to be committed. And that's something I've been really working on in the beginning, kind of explaining my process and the people I want to work with and the tools I want to implement and laying out a plan. And if you want to go along with that plan, then I'm probably the lawyer for you. If you don't want to go along with that plan, then I may not be the best fit for you. And this may not be, not that I don't like it. It's just I want to do the best job I can do too. Serious allegations require serious evidence.
yeah, I totally agree with you on that, and I think that's one thing we've tried hard to is to find that evidence. We get told story after story, and we're seeking the truth is what we're doing. We're seeking what's actually taking place, not just the allegation. We're trying to get that
One of
evidence.
the things, man, I love about you and I admire about you is you and I have had a few conversations with this was the objective. This is what we were set out to do. And
Right.
it's not there. And I've even heard you say that, hey, the client's out of money with us, but I'm going to do one more trash pull, or I'm going to do one more, surveillance or whatever it is you're doing that.
Yeah, my
Hey,
investigators that work for me will be the first to tell you that any case that we don't have evidence in, they are required to work harder. I require more out of them, more documentation. We routinely will go over retainer hours in a case if we don't have anything. I really want to be able to tell clients we have looked at everything you've told us. We've tried our best to verify or obtain what you're telling us is going on. I don't want to walk away just because it didn't pan out. I deal with clients all the time that think one thing may be happening, and then we come to discover something else that may be helpful in the case. But if I have to go back to a client and say we don't have findings, I want to be able to tell them we have done absolutely everything we could do in order to try to obtain that evidence for them. And so my guys will tell you all day long, I require more documentation, more investigating of a case that produces no evidence versus one that does. We're not a clock watcher. We don't call and go, "Hey, you're out of hours. We can't do anything else. Pay us more money." I mean, we have the ability to keep working that case if we choose, you know. And so if we can and we can fit it in, we're going to do a little extra on it. We just, like with any business, we're still a business. We work off your reputation. And the best thing we can do is be the best at what we do and make sure they know we go above and beyond what we do. And so we try very hard to make sure of that. I have had plenty of clients that we've had no evidence, but by the time I presented the report to them, by the time I've showed them what we've done and then what we've went above and beyond to do, they've still been happy with us because they know that it wasn't there. And some clients know that maybe it's there, maybe it's not there. Uh, and they're
well,
more wanting to
that's
see what is there.
to me, it speaks a lot to you because it shows that it's, your passion. Your passion is to uncover the truth. And, I think, the longer I do this, my wife and I talk about it, she's like, what are your takeaways or, from interviewing people or, I think the older I get, it all comes down to what's your why.
Right.
Why do you want to work here
Right.
for interviewing you for here? Why do you want to do this case? Is it a benevolent, good reason that you want to bring this case, or is it just, spite or anger or, just to get
And
even
that's
with
and that's what
somebody?
we fill out the same thing because that's one of the biggest things on my mind when I first talk to a client about child custody is, you can tell in the conversation how many times they brought up that the other spouse is now dating, and they don't like that person, but they don't have a real reason why they don't like that person. So they're focused on almost like a revenge factor. And we're not in this to help somebody with the revenge part of it. If there's truly a concern, we're here to help. And
It's
all my
it's
guys are in this business because they love doing investigations. I don't have one that thinks of it as a job. They're passionate about wanting to find those answers. But, and I'm sure you run into the same kind, that you want to make sure what they're doing is something that's moral.
it kind of leads us into one of the questions. I always come with the plan questions, and then notably the conversation just takes off.
Right.
But you know, I have a laundry list of things I see all the time that people think if I prove this in court, then it's going to make a big difference, especially in child custody cases. I think you hit one right
Absolutely.
there with their dating.
Yes.
And my first is, well, who are they dating? Is the person got a background? Is the person got some kind of a history, or something that's an inappropriate person to have your child exposed to? Um, you know, I was going to ask you though, as the private investigator, when you get the calls, what's some of the more outlandish or irrelevant things people want you to go look for or try to prove in a child custody case, and you kind of got to put the brakes on and
Right.
tell them, hey, I don't think that's going to move the needle for you.
So we get all kind of stories, but I would say the most common like misconception of about something that would help a child custody case is if they are on a 50-50 parenting plan and the person we're supposed to be watching, the other spouse, does not have the child that week. Outside of breaking the law and being a criminal, the judge probably is not going to care what they do if they're not caring for that child. I have routinely, probably once a week, well, I know he's out drinking this week. I'm like, well, is it his week with the child? Well, no. Well, I don't think the judge is going to care he went to happy hour. Well, it shows that, and I have to reel him back in. Well, it shows he drinks. Well, it does, but it doesn't show he drinks or endangers his child or takes away from him being a parent on his week or doing what he needs to do. So I would say their concern about what the other parent's doing when they don't have the child, again, outside the scope of just committing crimes, is not going to be an influence or a factor in the case to us. If they truly want to pay us to go watch, I can say, well, we got it. Now you may want to talk to your attorney about how you're going to use it, because I don't see anything that's going to come out of that.
People often kind of buzz past. As a lawyer, the number one question is how is it relevant?
Right.
What material fact does it prove or disprove? That's kind of got to be the starting point. And what you're saying in lawyers' terms is there's got to be a nexus between the conduct and the child.
Right.
If you and I don't have our kids and we decide that we want to go tie one on at a local bar, and nobody's going to be responsible for kids that day, and the kids are with the mom or out of town or whatever, that's not bad parenting because there's no nexus between the conduct and the child. And I remember our law school professor. This will show you a little bit how old I am and how old he was. Definitely, he said that the difference between a good dad and a bad dad in the child custody case was the bad dad left the Playboy magazine on the coffee table, and the good dad put it up and put it under the blanket in the closet. And he was demonstrating the nexus of the kid walking in and seeing something like that, inappropriate material on the coffee table versus putting it away. They both engaged in the same conduct. It's just one shielded the child from the conduct and kept adult topics or adult time separate the parenting time. And that's a big thing. That happens with us all the time too. That I have to remind them what nexus does this have, to the child. And
Right.
I think when you said dating, that often comes up because I have situations where they're dating and they haven't even introduced the child to the new person yet. And I'm like, well, if it's his weekend to be, alone and you have the kids and he's seeing somebody on the weekends, how's that affect the kids?
Yeah.
And you got to show that nexus, and that's critical. And then sometimes I know when I've called you or I've worked with other investigators over the years, I have no doubt the person is drinking.
Right.
I have no doubt that they're drinking all the time. What I need sometimes is the nexus to be proved.
Right.
I have to get some creative way that you're at the restaurant. I was at the restaurant. He sees the family come in at the Mexican restaurant, and he's sitting at the bar. And he watches dad drink 5 margaritas and then walk out to the car, to drive the kids home. And now we have a nexus. And that was something I was gonna ask you that kind of comes up, and it was one of the questions I kinda had was, during these investigations, if you're observing, let's say you're observing somebody and the person is drinking like a fish and they're about to drive off with the kids, have you ever immediately just had to call the police because you were so worried about, and maybe a risk blowing your cover, or how do you handle that situation?
I mean, we have had to call law enforcement. If we can still stay off the radar when we do it, we will. But if we have to burn our cover to assure safety of a child, we're gonna do what we have to do. I mean, I've had an investigator recently, almost exactly what you said, had a parent intoxicated and then try and put the child in the car and was going to travel with the child. He ended up already knew what was coming. He could see it coming basically. So he already was in contact with law enforcement. As soon as that parent hit the vehicle with that child and tried to back out, it was stopped at that point. There was no use in letting them get on the roadway or anything of that nature. Now, in saying that, we have to make good decisions also. Working cases in Jacksonville, I worked with an attorney and we had a client that dad did a lot of sports with the kids. Routinely, he would take the kids out to eat after a sporting event. He would drink a beer. He would drink one beer, not enough to call law enforcement, not enough that I would even want to provide that evidence to a judge, because me and the attorney in the case was in agreement where it's more sounds like we're nitpicking than worried about the actual safety of the child. Would I do it? Maybe not, but I don't think one beer is enough to justify that kid's in danger. Now if he sits over there and drinks 6, 8 beers or something, of course we're gonna, document, take action if we have to, stuff like that. So I think you got to have common sense in doing these investigations. And the clients me and my investigators talk, they're usually our biggest obstacle in the case. It isn't the person we're watching trying to deal with the client at the same time, because they take everything as an emergency or it's the worst thing that's ever happened. When if they tried to say that in front of the judge is probably had a beer last night at dinner. So I think it's distinguishing between what is factual evidence versus what's not in the case.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when people are going through the custody cases, it's your child, it's your life, and you're very close to the problem. It's obviously very emotionally driven. And I think sometimes having the lawyer or the investigator kind of act as that filter and that check, it's critical, in my opinion, to building a good case, because I have people come in and want to bring up every little thing that they can, and none of those things are significant, in my opinion. And even if you added up the weight of all of them, it's still not significant. Instead of doing that, we need to focus on this big issue
Yeah.
that's going to really do something for you, and proving that issue, and honestly focusing all the firepower of the investigation of the case onto that issue where you have the best opportunity to really make a difference.
Yeah, I think we see more of the problem with clients when the divorce is very recent or at the same time that the child dispute or custody dispute is going on, that they have other emotions being involved with one parent has already jumped into a relationship. So it's part of it is almost like they're, have to try to get them to walk back those emotions and let's focus what's best for the child. I can't help that your ex-wife is already dating, but it seems like when those are close together, when there's a divorce or child custody or a separation in a relationship close with the child custody, that I have to bring the clients a little more focused on what we're trying to accomplish because they're almost wanting to get anything they can, even if it's not going to help.
I agree with you. Emotion clouds good judgment. It clouds, in my opinion, the cause and effect of the evidence, and what it's going to prove, and how that chain's going to be built. And it leads to a lot of problems. And I think if you have a lawyer or you have an investigator, and we approach this with a very logical process, and have logical evidence that supports the factors for child custody, and really shows that this is what's in the child's best interest, that's so much better than the emotion. Sure, as a lawyer, do I want to sprinkle some emotion into the case, and do I want it to be robotic? Do I want to show that you're a good person? Do I want to show that you're taking your kid to trips, and you're a little league coach, and the softer moments? I think that's great kind of character evidence, and lets the judge have a flavor of who you are. But we still have to focus on where we're going with the case, and the heavier factors of how we're going to get over that presumption of 50-50. But
Right.
Jacob, like always, when I was talking to you about doing this, I told you the 45 minutes would blow past, and we wouldn't get to about half the questions, which is the case. We've hit our 45-minute mark, but I always want to leave off with giving you an opportunity again. Where can somebody who needs your help find you? What's your website? How do you prefer to be contacted? The name of your company, because there's lots of people who are going through this, and the whole purpose of this podcast is just to give people good information about people who work in family law or assist in family law in some shape or form, so that they can make the best decisions with their cases. How do they get in touch with you, Jacob?
So yeah, so to kind of close it out, we work full investigations. You got a lot of private investigation agencies out there that mostly they just do some surveillance. They sit in the car. My guys know that you can't always sit in the car to make these cases. I'm sure we're doing another podcast. We'll talk about more. I mean, we probably one of the only agencies that employ an in-house family evaluator with a master's degree in social work. We use her to get her opinion in cases to know, what some of the dangers are. She's worked for DCF. She was the president of the Northwest Florida Domestic Task Force. So we bring her in. We have an analyst that me and you both have ran into that we've had nothing in the case. And he says, lo and behold, nobody's ran the brother that has moved in because we had the brother on video and he was a sex offender. Being left with a child alone, that was obviously a big factor. I mean, we have several cases. I think when you first met, I don't know if I had you believing in private investigators until I provided the evidence to you in one of the cases we worked in. I think I changed your opinion on us. So we can jump off to that next time or get into a little more of some of that. Because we do a lot of stuff for child custody that we are only scratching the surface. As far as getting a hold of us, our agency's name is Nolin and Associate, Nolin. It's me and my dad. We started the agency in 2018. both retired as law enforcement. Almost everybody we have employed for us has more than 20, 25 years experience in investigations, have worked either as a federal agent or a law enforcement officer. As far as our website goes, our website is NNA Investigations. Our phone number is 850-899-2717. Outside child custody, we work almost any type of investigation, but I would say child custody is probably the investigation we work most. And in closing out, we don't deter anybody from checking around, but I always advise people, if they are checking into a child custody investigation, make sure anybody they vet does have the experience to actually work an investigation. Also, I would require any agreement or work they're going to do to put that, that contract needs to be in writing. We put everything in writing, so there's a very clear assignment to our investigators what we're going to try to accomplish. And at the end of that case, they're not required unless requested, which is a requirement for my investigators, is to provide a final written report. Under their licensing agreement with the state, upon request, they have to provide the client a report. We get a phone call about once a week of where another investigator has been hired. They call the client a few days later, say, you're out of money, you're out of hours, I got nothing to show you. That is not okay with me, and that wouldn't fly in my agency. We're going to show you every single thing that we did in that case once we close out. And so I would just implore people to ask those questions, But again, we're Nolin and Associates. We got several websites. Almost any attorney in town knows who we are, and we're proud of what we do. We work hard, and we'll do the best we can. I guess I'll close out with saying that it is our belief that if parents can work a child custody issue out, 50-50 is the best way to go. Co-parenting is the way to go. It ain't always the best way to go in situations where there's allegations of abuse or neglect or something of that nature. But if two parents just because they're no longer married and can't get along, they can still co-parent. And if that's the way to go, we're not trying to talk anybody into doing an investigation that they should not be doing. I have no problem telling our client that we have not seen what they are telling us is happening. I do it all the time. Now if it's there, we're going to find it. But if it's not, what's best for the children? It's not about the parents' feelings. It's about what is best for these children. And those children having both parents in their life, if both parents are loving, caring parents that are taking care of them, that's how they agree. I agree with the 50-50. I believe that's how it should be outside of some other circumstance.
Well, Jacob, every time I talk to you, it's insightful. I always learn so much about the process and what goes into the investigation. And I wanted to really, from the beginning, get you on here because I do think a lot of people have a lot of questions about what private investigators do, how they help, why you might want them in a child custody case, why you might need them for other aspects of a case. Like I said, this podcast is all about just giving people the information they need to make the best decisions for their cases and giving them a little better understanding of what family law is all about and who's a participant in it and what role everybody plays.
Right.
And you hit the nail on the head, buddy. You will be back on. We will probably talk until you're hoarse because there's so much we could delve into when it comes to investigations and evidence collection and, all kinds of topics that come up.
I think you can be one of one of the people that could testify that some of the findings that we have has changed the direction of a case.
I had two cases that I can think of off the top that I'm fairly certain would not have.
Yeah, I think we have a client in common that hired 3 other private investigators before us. They all told her she was not telling the truth. I think remember, if I recall right, the court-ordered parental counselor, I guess you would call him, was even not believing her story until the evidence came up, and then everybody decided to recant on what they were thinking. I think that was a pretty good case for us.
Yeah. Well, extraordinary. I'm going to end it with extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Sometimes you got to have an extraordinary person to go find that extraordinary evidence. Jacob, we love working with you.
And, thank you for having me on.
Thank you for taking the time to explain to our clients and people who listen to the podcast the role of a private investigator. You know, sometimes I can tell them stuff. I think people who hear it from the horse's mouth and get a feel for what it's all about, you know, they make better decisions.
Right.
And you know, but Jacob, we will definitely have you back on. Thank you for giving us your time, and we look forward to the next time, which I guarantee you will be coming up, because I could talk to you for hours. But enjoy yourself. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, turn on your notifications. Like I said, the whole purpose of the podcast is just to give people good information who are going through a family law case or maybe facing one in the future and just kind of want to know what they're getting themselves into. You know, it's, you know, it can't spread without your help. And I'm certainly, almost everybody knows somebody can use this information. So please like, share, subscribe, and get the word out there. And thank you, Jacob. And y'all have a good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.